divorce, handling divorce. And it's interesting because the Talmud, in the order of the Talmud, the tractate which deals with divorce comes before the tractate which deals with marriage. Very strange. You think in the natural order of things, first comes marriage, then comes divorce. But it seems that the Talmud is telling us a person should go into marriage prepared for the eventualities. Even before a person gets married, he's got to know that marriages do end in divorce, and that should serve as a spur to do better in the marriage. If people know that marriage could end in divorce, there's more pressure to perform in a certain sense. And therefore a person should try and pull their socks up. You know what? This is not a Catholic marriage, it's a Jewish marriage. Jewish marriage, possibilities are that it could end in a divorce, and therefore we've got to try hard. A person's got to try hard. And number two, and it's also, people are scared to go into marriage. Why? Especially if it's irreversible. Imagine being stuck in a marriage where you can't get out of. So the Torah leaves the options open. And this way there's no pressure. Sometimes there's too much pressure in a situation. The person knows there's no way of backing out. Won't even get into the situation in the first place. So Judaism leaves the options open. There is a way out. Marriage is not 100% permanent. It's as permanent as it can be, but it's not 100% permanent. There is a way out. If things get so rough, and the question is, what does it mean so rough? That's a whole big discussion in the Talmud. And as usual, there are two big rabbis who argue, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. The house of Shammai, the school of Shammai, and the school of Hillel. Two different viewpoints. What is so bad about the marriage that people should get divorced? Sometimes people should get divorced. So one opinion is, it doesn't have to be so much major. It can be something very minor. The person doesn't like the woman's cooking. It's grounds for divorce, according to Hillel. It's interesting, Hillel has a very lenient opinion over here. Grounds for divorce could be something minor. Shammai says no. Grounds to divorce, he based it on a verse in the Torah. The Torah says, if a person sees in his spouse erva davar, he sees something erva, he sees some nakedness, he sees some immorality, then then it says he will write to divorce. So it's only based, according to Shammai, Beit Shammai, only if there is some immorality in the marriage, people fooling around, is that a grounds for divorce. Otherwise, the soup doesn't taste good, the food doesn't taste good, that's not grounds for divorce. People can learn technique. You send them to cooking school or go to other kinds of schools, you can learn any kind of technique. But if there's fooling around, we draw the lines. That marriage is on the rocks. If there's fooling around in the marriage, there's no faith, there's no fidelity in the marriage, that marriage should be dissolved. There's no fidelity. The word for marriage in Jewish law is kiddushin, which means holiness. It's got to be a bond of holy marriage, holy matrimony, what's called holy matrimony. What's holy about marriage? And the answer is, holiness is abstaining from everything else. The person devotes all their attention to their spouse and removes everyone else from their minds. That is considered holiness. Same relationship with us and God. A person's got to just pay attention to God and no other gods. So also in marriage, a person's got to pay attention to their spouse and no one else. And this is a very important idea, which unfortunately today is being lost, and that's why so many marriages are dissolving. A person's got to close their eyes when they get married. Before marriage, you've got to open your eyes. After you get married, you've got to close your eyes. You just got to pay attention to one person in one's life. That one person is the planet around which one revolves, or the sun on which one revolves. And so we see that what's interesting is, number one, divorce comes before marriage. The Talmud explains divorce before marriage. So we explain that. What is the importance of marriage? What is so important about marriage? So basically, marriage has two fundamental purposes. One purpose is, the Torah says, pruvu, increase and multiply. And until today, it's been impossible to increase and multiply by oneself. It's impossible. Even till today, with all cloning, you still need a woman to carry that baby. It's impossible to clone and that's it. The baby's born in a test tube. Impossible. The baby has to be, that fetus has to be planted into a mother, a living mother. So till today, we still need a mother. So it's impossible to go through the whole process of having children without both the male and the female. It's impossible. So till today. And when it gets possible, life probably won't be worth living anymore. And that's a different topic. That's my next series on medical ethics. We're going to talk about cloning and stem cells and kind of research. Interesting. But the other fundamental part of marriage, which is the Torah also, right at the beginning of Genesis, says, Lo tov hiot adam levado. It's not good for a person to be alone. One of the causes of mental instability is loneliness. A lot of people are lonely today. A lot of people don't have anyone to turn to. Why don't they have anyone to turn to? Because they burn their bridges. They burn their bridges with their parents. They burn their bridges with their siblings. They burn their bridges with their spouse. They have no one left. And they burn their bridges with God. So they really have no one left. So one of the purposes of marriage is to encourage people to live in a social framework. Man is a social animal. We're all social beings. We have to communicate with others. We have to be able to get things off our chest. We need to talk. So instead of spending $17 an hour to a psychologist, it's good to have a spouse, you can talk to, and they can talk back, and you can get things off your chest, and you relate to each other. And people usually live longer if they're married. Statistics are they're married, they live longer. Why? Because they have a company in life. So it's very, very important. The second reason is very, very important. People forget about the second reason, that it's not good for a person to be alone. And therefore, even if a person is very old and they get divorced or the spouse passes away, it's recommended. Jewish law highly recommends a person to remarry. It's always good to be with someone else. It's never good to be alone. So that's the second reason. The third thing is, the Talmud tells us, this is a Talmud which is right at the end of the tractate which deals with divorce. It's right at the last page of divorce. And over here the rabbis warn us. And it tells us, Rabbi Eliezer says, if a person divorces his first wife, the altar in the temple sheds tears. Obviously, it's not to be taken literally. It's very symbolic. The altar of God sheds tears. God's altar sheds tears. And that's, in other words, it's not good to get divorced. It's a last resort. God's altar sheds tears when a person gets divorced. God is in pain. God is suffering when a person gets divorced. Why is that? We find the word in Hebrew for a man and a woman is ish and isha. And ish is aleph yud shin, isha is aleph shin hey. When you put them together, you get yud and hey extra in the word. So you got the yud from ish and hey from the woman. Yud and hey is God's name, Yud K. Hallelujah. Yah is Yud Hey. That's God's name. Praised is God. First, it's the most powerful word, and if you want to praise God, the most powerful word is Hallelujah. It's a Jewish word from the Psalms. King David ends off some of the Psalms with Hallelujah. He starts off some Psalms with Hallelujah as well. But that's God's name. So man and woman together make up the name of God. When man and woman are apart, God is also apart. Breaking up God's presence. When there's unity among people, God's presence resides. In unity, God's presence doesn't reside. So there is a pain in terms of spiritual terms to God himself. God created man and woman. Man and woman are splitting up. God is in pain. God is suffering. The altar, the Talmud says, cries. We're going to discuss one of the ideas. We find the altar has two reasons. Two purposes for the altar. One purpose for the altar was, Rambam says, a person brings a korban, a sacrifice. The word for korban comes from the word karov, which means to draw closer. The idea of sacrifice was to draw man and God closer. To build a bond. So the idea of an altar is a place to build a bond between man and God. The second idea of the altar was to ask forgiveness. A person would bring a sacrifice, sin offering. Why? To ask forgiveness from God. So the altar had two purposes. To build bonds and to ask forgiveness. So what the Talmud is saying is, if a person gets divorced, the altar cries. Why? Those two purposes were not fulfilled in the marriage. The bonds were not brought. There were no bonds created. And people didn't ask for forgiveness. And usually people are waiting for the other party to ask forgiveness first. Right? It's always the other party did the wrong, they got to ask forgiveness. The other party says, well, I'll wait till the other party. There's a law in Kansas, I never knew this, it's amazing. The Kansas law. The Kansas law is if two trains approach a crossing, what's the law in Kansas? They both have to stop. And no one shall pass until the other one passes. It's a crazy law because which one goes first? Doesn't say. They both have to stop, and no one's allowed to pass until the other one passes. So one of them's got to take the initiative and pass. Otherwise the other one's stuck. So the same thing applies in marriage. Sometimes we wait for the other party to say sorry. And everyone's waiting. They're both waiting. The Kansas law. People are confused. They're both waiting. This guy's going to start. That one's going to start. Who's going to go first? People are waiting to see who's going to go first. And the answer is, the person's going to be a man and go first. Even a woman sometimes going to be, pardon the pun. Okay, the woman's got to sometimes be the man and go first. If the man's not a man, the woman's got to be the man and go first. Be the stronger one and go first and say sorry. Sorry is just a word. That's what it is. A person can say sorry. It's very important to break ice, to break the ice in a relationship. So he said the altar cries. Why does the altar cry? Because number one, the bonds weren't built. The altar is building a bond between man and God. People did not build the bonds in their lives. They didn't build a solid bond. Number two, people didn't say sorry. The altar is there for forgiveness. People didn't say sorry. So the altar cries. In other words, a person did not fulfill these two ideas of the altar. So that's what the Talmud says in the end of the tractate dealing with divorce. It tells us that the altar cries. The Pirkei Avot, Ethics from Sinai, tell us a very important idea. We've got to talk about why do marriages break down? Why do so many marriages break down today? Let's offer some reasons. These are all reasons which I came up with, but I'm sure they're not 100% watertight. I'm sure there are other reasons as well. It's a very generalizing. The Talmud says in Pirkei Avot, it says, any love which is dependent on something, when that something disappears, the love disappears. When the person gets married for beauty, when the beauty evaporates, marriage is over. The love is dependent on beauty. The beauty is over, the love is over. Man gets married for money, money's lost, marriage is over. So a person gets married for a certain desire. When that desire is not satisfied, the marriage is over. Marriage is on the rocks. That's what the Pirkei Avot says. So we see an important idea. What are the reasons? We can see by the results of the marriage, what's the end result, what the reasons for the marriage were. If the marriage breaks up because of something, it means that was the reason for the marriage in the first place. So now it means that the person's not getting what they wanted from the marriage, and therefore they want to back out. So it's good to get married for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? God says to get married. This way. God always says to get married. By the way, it's interesting. It's very easy to get married. What do you have to do? Come on, tell us how. What do you have to do to get married? Jewish law. You got to get a ring and 2 witnesses. And, and today we make big parties, but really that's not necessary. You need a minyan. You need a minyan, 2 witnesses out of the 10, and you don't even need a rabbi in Jewish law. The rabbi is just there to make sure it's done properly. You don't really need a rabbi. The rabbi's not doing anything. And so therefore you need a ring and 10 men. That's it. Get married. Very easy. It's very easy to get married. But it's much harder to remain married. It's very easy to get married. It takes a lot of efforts. That's what people don't know. People think, I'm getting married. Great, mazel tov. But then the next night, that's where the trouble starts. You've got to remain married now. It's easy to get married. Anyway, any fool can get married. You give the ring and you're married, that's it. Any fool can get married. The hard part, and that takes a lot of wisdom, the hard part is putting in the efforts and the energy to stay married. It's very easy to start something. Start the process. The Talmud says, interesting idea. Who brought the bones of Joseph out of Egypt? Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses carried the bones out of Egypt. When the Bible talks about it in the book of Joshua, it says the bones that the people of Israel brought out of Egypt. So Talmud says, what's going on? They didn't bring it out. Moses brought it out. Talmud says, since they buried Joseph, whoever finishes the act is considered the one who started the act. As you go by the end. Because getting married is great. A person got married. Mazel tov. God, I got married. So yeah. What's the end? What's the last chapter of the book? It's right. You read the book, right? The first chapter starts off very nicely. What's the conclusion? How does it end? So it ends well. Everything's good. It means everything went well. A person's got to put the energy in, put the momentum in, keep the momentum of marriage up. And what happens is, unfortunately, a lot of marriages just lose momentum. People don't realize you've got to keep on putting the energy in. It's not a question of just you're married and that's it. No. You're married and that's it, and then everything goes downhill. You're married and that's it, and stays the same. You're married and that's it, and grow. So marriages ideally should grow. The relationship should grow. That's the ideal. Or at least stay static, but not go downwards. So it takes a lot of energy, and people don't realize that how much energy it does take. So why do divorces occur? Number one reason is lack of communication. People don't communicate today. The average statistic is 27 minutes a week. People communicate, not about who's going to do the chores, but about getting to know each other. So people spend more time getting to know each other before marriage. That's when everything goes well. After marriage, they don't talk to each other anymore. It's very strange. They talk more. A man talks more to his secretary in the office than he talks to his wife. It's true. You talk more to people you work with than you talk to your spouse. So that's one of the problems. Number two, sometimes people made a mistake by getting married. They just realized after they got married that we're not compatible. there was chemistry or there was some romance or whatever it is, and they got blinded. We talked about it in our love and marriage class. People get blinded. Love is blind. That's what they say. That's a saying. We said in Judaism, you don't get married for love. You get married based on rational common sense. It's a big mistake to get married blinded. Lovesick. Person's lovesick. Person's getting married when they're sick. That's not right. Person's going to get married with a clear head. Because what happens is people are lovesick, people are blinded. They wake up the next day, hey, I made a big mistake. I was blinded, really blinded, literally blinded. So a lot of marriages end because the magic is over. They were blinded before, and now they find out they're not compatible. Marriage was not based on rational thought. They're based on craziness, crazy ideas. Number 2, people change and grow apart. This is the truth of human nature. Human nature never stands still. We're always developing. And we should develop. Trouble is, we don't develop in the same way, we grow apart. So we have to develop the same activities, the same interests, the same love, the same things which bond us together, not different things which break us apart. So it's very important. People change and people grow apart. And number 3 is the pressures of life. The pressures of life today are much greater. It's amazing. We have more leisure time than ever before. Amazing, think about it. More leisure time than ever before. They've had a society which had so much leisure time. And what happens? And yet we feel the pressure is so great. Why? Because what we do is high pressured. Person works. The little amount of work they do. I mean, in terms of physical energy, it's very little amount of work. But there's tremendous stress doing that little amount of work. So the pressures of life are so great. So it's like being in a pressure cooker. You come home, you want to relax. Both parties want to relax because both parties work today. You come home and you can't relax. It's another pressure cooker. So people look for exit signs. They can't find relaxation at home. The home should be an oasis. But one guy comes home and starts screaming and shouting. He had a bad day at the office, a pressure day, wants to scream and shout. And the other party comes home and they have no patience. And they're going to start screaming and shouting, which would happen normally. The whole thing's going to fall. So therefore, a person's going to make sure they don't bring the pressures of life into their marriage. Leave the pressures of life in the office. Don't bring it home. It's very important. It's very hard to do. There was a guy who had a bush outside his house. And every night when he came home, he would go through the motions of hanging something on the bush. So they asked him, what are you hanging? He said, I'm hanging all my pressures from the office on this bush before I go in my house. Symbolically, he's hanging things on the bush. There's all my troubles from the office, all my pressures. I'm going in my house, I'm going to enjoy myself. I don't want to take my burdens in the house with me. It's very important for a healthy marriage. Number 4, unfortunately today, society has accepted divorce to such an extent that people copy. We copy each other. We go by peer pressure. It's peer pressure. So one time, marriage was frowned upon. Very few people got divorced. Divorce was frowned upon. Very few people got divorced. And therefore, it just was a no-no. You never got divorced. So you stuck it out. A person would stick it out. Today, divorce is so well accepted that if you're still married after 5 years, people think you're crazy. It's the other way around today. So that's one of the problems today is societal acceptance of divorce. Today's society accepts divorce. In Judaism, it's interesting, it's a law in the books, but society never accepted it. Till recently. And divorce rates amongst religious Jews are like 10%, 15% now. They're catching up. But it was unheard of in a religious community to get divorced. These levels of divorce are unacceptable. They're totally unacceptable. And that's why we have to talk about it more and discourage it as much as possible and we have to try and make people get along. It takes a lot of working on, it takes a lot of guts, it takes a lot of willpower. People have to get along. And they have to realize that divorce is the worst of the options, and especially when they're children. Divorce really is a terrible option, especially when they're children. We've got to talk about the impact on children, because children really feel it the most. And I've seen kids who are born and they live amongst divorced parents. You know, there's a famous story. A psychologist gets a call in the middle of the night. And the father calls, he says, you know, we're divorced and it's my night for visitation. So the kid went to sleep, but he says, he couldn't sleep. He says, I want mommy. Try and make him sleep. It's my night. The kid doesn't understand. I want mommy. So what do? Make him dress up, take him to his mother's house. So she puts him to bed. And what does he do? He starts screaming, I want daddy! So it goes on 3-4 times. The father's at his end of his wits, doesn't know what to do. The mother doesn't know what to do. Calls a psychologist. We need to come in. The kid needs a psychologist. So the psychologist says, no, the kid needs parents. Every kid needs parents. However bad the marriage is sometimes. From the child's perspective, the children need a mommy and they need a daddy. Children need parents. Very, very important. People, we don't realize that. We just live for ourselves. We don't realize what's going on in the little mind of a little child. You can break a child. I've seen children broken. Mentally, emotionally, they're broken children. Why? And that leads to more broken families. A child from a broken relationship is much more likely to get divorced himself than anyone else. So it leads to much more breakups. So a person's emotionally drained, emotionally battered because the parents are living apart. So one day he's with the mommy, and then what's worse is, the mommy is saying what a bad daddy he is. And it kills him inside. I got a bad daddy. And then he goes back to daddy. He says, mommy's bad. Poor kid. What kind of parents does he have? So the poor kids, we have to really think about when a couple need counseling, they should go for counseling. This should be pointed out to them, black and white. Okay, you don't get along. Think of the results in your children. You're going to create monsters. You're creating children with no hope. You're creating children with no guidance. You're creating children who are broken. Inside they're broken. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. And what people don't realize is, if there are children, divorce does not sever the bonds. People don't realize it. They think, when we get divorced, we don't see each other anymore. Wrong. Got to pay support. You got to visit the kids. You're seeing this. The spouse is seeing them all the time. And people don't like it. And they hate it. Gets on their nerves. So the truth is, divorce really does not solve all the issues unless there are no children. And they split the property and they just vanish from each other's lives. But if there are kids, divorce is never a divorce. There's never a clean break. Because there's always baggage. And this baggage cannot be cut nicely, neatly. You can't split children nicely. So that's one of the major problems in marriage, the damage to the children. Let's talk a bit about the shift in attitude. And we talked about the shift in attitude. At one time, marriage was holy and divorce was taboo. Even though it's allowed, it was taboo. What happened was, in the past few decades, we find there's a column in the newspapers. Dear Abby, right? Ever heard of Dear Abby? Dear Abby, Abigail Van Buren. And she has a column over there. And previously she would counsel couples to do all they could to save their marriages. And then recently she started telling couples, look out for your own interests, get divorced. It's better to get divorced than lead unhappy lives. So they asked Dear Abby, well, how come you changed your perspective? What happened? 50 years ago, 30 years ago, you were telling people to stay married. 30 years later, you're telling people to get divorced. What's going on? So she started to explain. She says, sometimes an effort to save a marriage is not worth saving. Why? Because people destroy themselves and they destroy each other. So if you leave a marriage which is unsuccessful, people are going to destroy each other. So it's better that they should survive as individuals and get divorced. This way they survive. And this is really the reality of contemporary times. What is the reality of contemporary times? People are in it for themselves. I want what's good for me. She wants what's good for her. And therefore, we cannot submerge our own personalities and wishes. I live for myself. She lives for herself. That's it. Two selfish individuals can never get married and should never get married. Until they learn how to give, they shouldn't get married. And definitely shouldn't have children. Because children are just all about giving. So it's one of the major problems we have in today's society is people today are very self-centered. That's a nice way of putting it. People today are very, very self-centered. Me first, and therefore they can't get along anymore. Me first. This marriage does not suit me. Now I've already said, this marriage does not suit me. Okay, get divorced. Dear Abby says get divorced now because it's too much to expect from people to submerge their own desires, their own selfish desires. And let's go through some surveys, some interesting surveys which shed some light on this problem of marriage. These are surveys which were taken recently, about 10 years ago. Within the 21 to 34 age range, which is a very young age range, 50% of males and 67% of females stated if they had a chance they would not marry the spouse again. If they weren't married and they had to choose the same partner, 50% of men said no. 67% of women said they would never marry the same guy again. And it seems as if, over time, the older the people they asked, the responses were 20% said they wouldn't marry their spouse again. What happens? The younger the kids, seems like they don't like who they're living with. The older, seems like they like who they're living with. So we have two alternatives. Either marriage matures with age, like good wine, it gets better, or, and people get used to each other, or something drastic happened in society to change people's perspectives in life. And probably the second is more true than the first. Right? People's perspectives changed all of a sudden. People became more me-oriented. It's the me generation. When did the me generation start? 60s? The me generation. Well, it's the me generation. And listen to this statistic. Within the 21 to 34 age range, 69% of males and 67% of females claimed that they were the first to apologize. So it's impossible to have 67 and 69%. You're talking about over 130%. But 130% of people are apologizing out of 100%. Impossible. So there's a big discrepancy. Everyone thinks that I'm doing the maximum. They're not doing I'm doing the maximum. The other party says, no, I'm doing the maximum. So that tells us what's wrong in the marriage. Each one of the spouse thinks they're right, and the other one is wrong. I'm apologizing, they're not apologizing. Again, look at this one. Just talk about closet space. Who has more closet space? So stupid, so silly thing. Who has more closet space? In the 21 to 34 age group, 90% of males said she has more of closet space. 86% of the females, 80% females says he has more closet space. Not fair. He has more closet space. So that's another small, it just shows people's perspectives are, what's in it for me? It's not fair. Closet space, this closet space, small things. So that's a very interesting idea. It's the small things which show what's going on today, and that's really the problem today is the me generation. One of the major problems we have is the me generation. People don't even care for the kids anymore. It's not good for me, it's not good for the kids. Wrong, not good for you, but it's good for the kids. People don't realize that. Kids have got to get used to the fact that marriage is not just a bed of roses, and it's not. Marriage is not a bed of roses. Every marriage, right? Every marriage has got its ups and its downs. We all know that. It's like the stock market. It doesn't go up all the time. It's impossible. Otherwise, you'd end up eventually on Mount Everest. Wow, bliss. It doesn't really get better all the way. It goes up and down. Hopefully it's getting better. It's improving. But it goes up. Life goes up. Life goes down. And the trick is, it's a very important trick, make sure that the highs are not so high and the downs are not so down. Make sure that a person doesn't enjoy too much and get too carried away, because eventually the bubble's going to break and it's going to go smash. Like anything else. We went through this cycle in the stock market just recently. The bubble breaks. Same thing with marriage. It should be two marriages. People should have common sense. So you know what, we're enjoying it, but you know what, there's a limit to enjoyment. How much can we enjoy? And this way, we're not going to be so low when we don't enjoy it. The person's got to even out the ups and downs in life. And we have to know that in terms of our own emotions as well. We have to try and even out our emotions. Shouldn't go too high, shouldn't get too low. We know what happens when a person gets high, the day after they crash. They come back, they're depressed, they're disoriented, they crash. So it's important. And marriage as well, we have to realize that marriage is not just all up. Marriage has its ups, and marriage has its downs, and a person just needs the stamina to just keep it going. A person really needs stamina, emotional strength, spiritual strength, physical strength, mental strength to just keep it going until the next high. Eventually we'll get back up, hopefully. It goes back up. So that's an interesting idea, the ups and downs in marriage. There are good marriages and there are bad marriages. There are better marriages and there are worse marriages. Ideally, a person who marries is interested not just in having marriage survive, but having marriage thrive. Very important. Some people just put in a minimum amount of effort. I want my marriage to survive. The ideal would be put a bit more effort in and make the marriage thrive. A person's marriage should thrive. And the question is, do marriages thrive? Do we see around us people with marriages thrive? Oh, here in our synagogue, we're very fortunate. We have old-timers, 85-year-olds, walking around hand in hand. Oh, it's unbelievable. What a role model for us. 85-year-olds walking. They walk every morning in town. You see them walking hand in hand. They walk hand. They love. Look at each other. They love. 80. They're married 60 years. They're in love. 60 years. Hard to understand. Today's day and age is very hard to understand. They're good, tremendous role models. So they're thriving. Their marriage is thriving. Why? They put the energy, they put the efforts in to make their marriages thrive. And how does a person make the marriage thrive? The answer is, there's a basic principle in the Torah. Where a non-Jew came to Rabbi Akiva, he says, teach me the whole Torah on one foot. What did Rabbi Akiva tell him? Love your friend as yourself. It's not neighbor, it's friend in the Torah. Love your friend as yourself. The rest is all commentary, go and learn. Who's one's best friend? Who should one person love the most? And the answer is one's spouse. Spouse should be the best friend. So love your friend as yourself. That's the key for a successful marriage. That's how to make a person's marriage thrive. If I do favors for my spouse, and they're going to do favors for me, everything's going to thrive. It's very important to put those energies into the system. Because what happens is, normally is, like Kansas, they're both waiting for each other. Who's going to do it first? If she treats me nicely, I'll treat her nicely. But be the man. Jump in. You know, the Red Sea never split. Till what happened? He jumped in. Nachshon ben Aminadav jumped in the sea. God says, go! Well, hey, 1 second, God. The water's still there, God. It's up to my neck. Go, keep going. He keeps going, the water splits. Someone has to be the person to jump in. Someone has to do the first move. And that first move, sometimes you got to keep on doing the first move, because the other party's waiting for you all the time. And it takes a lot of energy. The person's got to be the person to put the energy in the marriage. Sometimes one person can be the person to put the energy in the marriage. The other person's not interested in putting so much energy into the marriage. They just don't have the strength. Some people don't have the emotional stamina and the strength. So the other party's got to be the one to do it. But realistically, that's the ideal. Most marriages don't reach that ideal. They may reach 50%, 40%, 30%. So some marriages thrive. Some marriages just plug along. That's also good. Plugging along is also good. You have kids who thrive in school, do 90s, and those kids who pass 60s, 70s. They get passing grade. They pass, they passed. So a person's marriage can pass, or a person's marriage can excel. Depends on how much interest a person puts into this. So basically, let's now talk about the D word. So we talked about marriage and how important it is to have a good relationship. One of the primary principles in Jewish law is divorce is a last resort. Right? Divorce is a last resort. Where do we see this? We find there's a concept in Jewish law, interesting concept. A person gets married, and he gets divorced, and his wife marries someone else, and she gets divorced. She's not allowed to remarry the first husband. Jewish law. She's never allowed to remarry the first husband. Never. Why? It's legal wife swapping. What happens? Imagine two couples, they want to swap wives. They're married, they want to do everything legit. What happens is, get divorced, swap, marriage, get divorced and swap back. Torah says, gonna let you play this game. Divorce is not a game. Divorce and marriage are not games. We see over here. They're not games. A person shouldn't play around. It's like playing with fire. A person should not play around. And to divorce with no adequate reason is a breach of Jewish law. Jewish law says you have to have a reason. It's not just a person wakes up one morning and says, you know what, I want to get divorced. It doesn't work like that. Why do you want to get divorced? Is it an adequate reason? And we said the debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And the Shulchan Aruch says it's only the reason is, acceptable reason in Jewish law is if there's immorality involved. Obviously there are other reasons as well. But that's the basic reason. A person wakes up one day and says, I want to get divorced. Sorry, we don't do divorces so easily. But I got a problem in my marriage. What's the problem? We don't communicate properly. Okay, go to counseling. That's it. Go to counseling. We don't do divorces for this. Today what happens is we have no choice. Why? They go to the civil court and they get divorced and then they come to the rabbis. By then it's too late to do any counseling. It's just over. The marriage is over already. And unfortunately I don't know of any good marriage counselors. I've never seen marriage counselors who can cure a problem and say don't come back. I've seen marriage counselors who tell you come back next week. And they keep on coming the rest of the marriage. And I've seen people go to marriage counselors even before they get married. And that's a general rule. Person needs to go to marriage counselor before you get married, don't get married. But people go to marriage counselors day in, every week, for 20 years. What kind of marriage is that? I don't understand. You need a marriage counselor, that means you're not doing something right. That means you don't know how to figure out your own marriage. A person doesn't know how to figure out their own marriage. Okay, so the marriage counselor's job is to teach the person how to do it. You teach a kid how to walk. You can't be a parent all your life. You teach a kid how to walk. If you didn't teach the kid how to walk, you're not a good parent. If the marriage counselor doesn't teach people how to have satisfactory marriages, they're not good marriage counselors. I don't know of a single good marriage counselor who is successful enough to teach people this is a marriage. Maybe there is. Maybe you can find me someone. And people ask me all the time. I know marriage counselors who took the money and the other people, they ended up divorced anyway. But there's no, what's it called? There's no guarantees. They make you sign, no guarantees. We're going to be successful in saving this marriage. No guarantees. So divorce is only allowed when there's a necessity. It's a last resort. It's not a first resort. It's having a little problem. Okay, let's get divorced. Wrong. Don't get divorced for small things, only for big things. And secondly, even when there is a divorce, the divorce should be based on good feelings. It's very, very hard. Today what happens is, unfortunately, there's a divorce and it ends in recriminations and ends in legal proceedings and ends in bitterness and ends in hate. Wrong. That is not the way to get divorced. Getting divorced is a parting of the ways. But part the ways like human beings. Don't part the ways like savages with enmity and hate. Parting of the ways. Look, it didn't work out. We tried. It's like a business partnership. We tried our best. And you know what? It didn't work. Okay, there's a bit of hard feelings, but you know what? We'll get over it. I'll carry on my life. You carry on your life. Otherwise, we're going to have baggage the rest of our lives. We're going to live with hatred. And especially with our kids around, I've seen cases. It's terrible. They want to kill each other. Okay, not physically, but in court. They want to kill each other. So what happens? Who wins out? Lawyers. The lawyers are winning out this whole game. People are spending thousands of dollars. Where does it go? To the lawyers. The kids are starving. The people have got to sacrifice. Their houses go, their cars go, their wardrobe goes. Who's making the money? The lawyers. The lawyers are doing very well out of this. The Talmud says, no lawyers. In Jewish courts, there are no lawyers. We don't want lawyers. Unfortunately, today they're bringing it back. They're reintroducing lawyers in Jewish courts. The Talmud says, no lawyers. Pirkei Avot says, the judge should not make himself into a lawyer. He shouldn't teach people how to lie. It becomes a game. And you get a better lawyer, you get a better deal. People know all the tricks, whatever it is. But one second, we deal with people's lives over here. We're human beings. Treat each other with decency. And we find that the Talmud was saying before, the Talmud says an interesting case. In those days, they never had motor cars. Well, they have donkeys. Okay, let's go back a couple hundred years. Donkeys. Before Model T Ford started, the donkeys. The faithful donkey. Okay, so what happened was, the guy's donkey had a burden on it. And the donkey was staggering under his burden. Torah says, Azov ta'azov imo. Help him to take off the burden from the donkey. The Torah also says, if the donkey needs to be loaded up, help your neighbor load his donkey. Give him a hand. Hakem takim imo. Help him load his donkey. So the Talmud says, supposing these two things are happening at the same time. One neighbor is unloading his donkey. The other neighbor is loading his donkey. Which one comes first? So the Talmud says, unloading comes first. Why? Because you got to take into account the donkey suffering. The poor donkey has got a heavy burden. So help the neighbor to unload first. Then the Talmud says, but if the neighbor who's loading his donkey is someone you don't like, he's not a real enemy, but someone you don't like, you have personal animosity towards that person, whether it's based on misconceptions or whatever it is, you got to help that person first. Why? Use this as a tool to break that animosity. If you help him, and what happens with a donkey is, you got to be very careful how you take off the load, because you take it off unevenly, whole thing's going to fall down. So you got to actually start talking to each other. The process of unloading, help me with this, help me with that. They're helping each other, and they're talking to each other. They're breaking the ice. All of a sudden, they're smiling at each other. So we see, even in a case of animosity, also it's got to help. And that's a good model for divorces. And that we got to keep on helping, because you got to keep on helping. You got to pay support. You got to pay for the kids. You got to do this. You got to take the kids.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, go ahead.
Now, you mentioned about these Jewish courts of law.
Yes.
They still exist?
Yes, Jewish courts of law still exist, and in fact, I've got to talk about it, because a person gets divorced in a civil court. In Jewish law, he's not divorced. If he had a Jewish wedding, he has to have a Jewish divorce. To get divorced in Jewish law, he's going to get divorced properly, and this has terrible ramifications. Because if a woman who is married doesn't get a Jewish divorce, and goes and marries someone else, the child of that union could be what's called a mamzer, could be illegitimate. Because she is technically still a married woman. So that's adultery.
Where are these?
There's one in Elizabeth. The nearest one is Elizabeth, and there's one in Lakewood, and there's plenty in New York. There's tons of them. If you want, I can give you a number. There's Rabbi Teitz in Elizabeth. Rabbi Teitz is very famous. I think third generation Rabbi Teitz is in Elizabeth. They're like the main rabbis in Elizabeth for many years, 80 years or so. So Rabbi Teitz in Elizabeth takes care of all the divorces in this area. People go to Rabbi Teitz, yes.
He imports people from Brooklyn.
Yeah. He imports the sofer, the writer, the person who writes the divorces, imported from Brooklyn.
People come from Brooklyn.
Right. Okay. But he's the Abedin. He's the head of the Bedin. There's courts in Manhattan and other places. There's plenty of courts around. But a person's got to know that when you do a Jewish marriage, the only way to dissolve a Jewish marriage is a Jewish divorce. If you get married in a civil court, you need a civil divorce. If you get married in a Jewish court, you need a Jewish divorce. It's very, very important. People don't know that. People think, that you get married Jewishly and you just get a civil divorce and that's enough. It's not enough. A person needs a civil divorce as well, a Jewish divorce. What's involved in Jewish divorce? Very good. So the Torah says one line. It says, "V'katav la sefer kritur v'natan biyada." He will write a document of divorce and give it in a hand. Basically, what's involved is writing a document. So today, most people don't know how to write this document because in Hebrew it's written by a scribe. So the husband appoints a scribe to write a document. When it's ready, 2 witnesses sign it. It's rolled up and it's folded, and he takes it and he puts it into her hands in front of 2 witnesses. That's it. She takes it. That's her bill of document. That's a document of divorce. So what the idea is over there, just like you need both parties to agree to get married, you need both parties to agree to a divorce. It's a cutting of the bonds between them. So he gave her a ring to get her married. He has to give her a document to get her divorced. And then he's got this financial things also in Jewish law. There's a ketubah, which is signed at the wedding ceremony. In Jewish ceremony, there's a ketubah, which is the financial arrangements, like a prenuptial agreement. How much he's going to pay in the event of divorce, in the event of widowhood. So today, in America, we go by civil law. Unless parties, they forego the rights to civil law compensation. But usually most people go to civil law for the financial agreements. They just go to Jewish courts just for this document, the bill of Jewish divorce. Without that bill, they're still considered married in Jewish law. Yes. A get is a Jewish. That's what a get is. A get is this document which is written by a scribe on behalf of the husband, and it's got to be written personally for this particular husband, this particular wife. It's got to have the names in it, the place where they're getting divorced, the date, the Jewish date, and it's not a standard document. The document has got to be written from head to tail. It's 12 lines. The word get is a gimel and a tet. The numerical value in Hebrew, everything has numerical value. Gimel is 3, tet is 9. 3 and 9 is 12, so it has 12 lines. It has 12 lines saying that on so-and-so date, from the creation of the world, in so-and-so place, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, came before the Beit Din and said, I allow my former wife, to be free and marry whoever she wants. And that's signed by 2 witnesses. So he has to say the statement, this is written, and then 2 witnesses sign it, and it's done in front of a 3-man tribunal, and that's basically the divorce. And he takes it and gives it to his wife. That's a get. Yes.
So if let's say the husband and the wife don't go before the Jewish court and get this document, then when either of them go to get remarried, rabbis really shouldn't.
Very good. Excellent. Orthodox rabbis definitely will not, and conservative rabbis also will not. No. Reform rabbis will. Reform rabbis say that Jewish ceremony can be dissolved by a civil divorce. And they're causing a lot of problems. They're causing bastards, basically. The other 2 streams will not marry anyone who does not have a Jewish divorce. Conservative and Orthodox will not recognize. So in other words, if a woman never got a Jewish divorce and she got married, a Reform rabbi did the wedding, whatever it was, the child of that marriage could be a mamzer. And that child will not be married by a conservative rabbi or an Orthodox rabbi ever. The child has real problems. It's one of the things we have to look up when doing marriage, is we've got to find the status of the child. Number one, is the child Jewish? Number two is, what's the status? Was his mother divorced, not divorced? So there's two issues involved in getting married. Because we've got to check out the other party. Is number one, are they Jewish? Number two is, are they a legal progeny, legitimate progeny, or not? Okay, we know in Jewish law, affliction is forbidden. The Torah talks about different kinds of affliction. In Jewish law, affliction is called ona'ah. Ona'ah is affliction. There's different kinds of affliction. There's ona'ah dvarim, which is verbal affliction, verbal abuse we call today. There's physical abuse, and there's monetary abuse. There's three kinds of afflictions, which the Torah legislates. The Torah says not to abuse. Don't abuse physically. It's not allowed. If a person abuses physically, there's damages to pay. And if there's danger to life, it could be liable for attempted manslaughter. Abuse, physical abuse is not allowed. Verbal abuse is not allowed. Lashon hara. There's many laws about gossip. It's verbal abuse. A person is not allowed to call someone nicknames. Talmud says you call someone a nickname, the person has no portion of the world to come. Call someone a name they don't like. You fatso. It's funny, but the other person doesn't think so. You know, it's terrible. A person can lose their portion of the world to come just for calling someone a nickname they don't like. That's verbal abuse. Call someone a name, always knock them, talk to. So the third one is monetary abuse, and unfortunately, divorces sometimes all three are prevalent. There's physical abuse, there's verbal abuse, there's financial abuse. Try and rip each other off. Who's going to get more money out of it? So Jewish law forbids abuse. You've got to tell people who are getting divorced, get a clean break, come to some amicable relationship. And especially with their children, you have to come to some kind of arrangement which you can live with, and the children can live with. It's got to be a decent relationship. Okay, there's no love. Well, there shouldn't be hate. Don't make it a relationship of hate. There's no love. The love evaporated. But there's no love. Okay, you're like a stranger and I'm like a stranger. We shouldn't hate each other. So that's very, very important. And the affliction can be done in many different ways. One of them is the use of lawyers. So I want to afflict the other party. Well, I'll get a top lawyer to drive them crazy. Make them hire a lawyer. Make them spend through the nose. Make them bankrupt. The other way is through the children. Abuse through children. Using the children to knock the other party. Using visitation rights as a way of getting back at the other party. So there's different kinds of affliction. And the truth is, there are no winners in this situation. In a divorce, there are no winners. Both parties are losers. And this is true in marriage as well. If I beat my wife in an argument, I'm married to a loser. And no one wants to be married to a loser. There are no winners in the situation. It's a no-win situation. So we have an argument and I win. Did I win? No, I lost. Why? Because she lost. If she lost, I lost. You know, my father-in-law was a very, very smart guy. Very smart, very shrewd guy. He takes me aside the day after my wedding. He says, listen, he says, you'll never be happy if she is not happy. Remember this. If your wife is not happy, you won't be happy. And this is true the other way around as well. If your husband is not happy, the wife will never be happy. So in other words, what is he saying? He's saying, make her happy, you'll be happy. She makes you happy, she'll be happy. It's a two-way street. But we have to focus on each other, not on oneself. The person focuses on themselves, they'll never be happy. It's the cancer's law. Which train's going to move first? Who's going to do this first? But if we're concerned about the other party's welfare and the other party's happiness, then they'll be concerned about our happiness. That's the way it works in marriage. Otherwise, there's no winners. If I'm out one-upmanship, there's no winners in that situation. And the same thing applies in divorce. If we're out to afflict each other, it's a terrible disaster. The only people that win is the lawyers. That's it. The lawyers are laughing all the way to the bank. These people are crying. The lawyers are laughing. That's it. And it's very important, by the way, in divorce, to come to some kind of amicable relationship and some kind of arrangement without a lawyer there. There's such a thing as arbitration today. And it's usually a very high-powered lawyer who arbitrates between two parties. And they come to some kind of equitable relationship. That's the ideal situation. The two people should realize that instead of wasting our money on lawyers and fighting each other, all that money could go to the kids. All that money could go to us. Why should we burn it on lawyers? Let's come to some arrangement. And yes.
Oh, no, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, would the Jewish courts help in that respect?
Yeah, they would if they're asked to. But what happens is normally they're not even asked to. They're not even asked to arbitrate. There's such a thing as binding arbitration, where a person can sign a document and say, you know what, we go by whatever's arbitrated. We go by the arbiter. Each party signs, and that's legal. That's a legal document which can be upheld in court. They already agreed to. Legal arbitration. So this could really affect the children. And that could really affect their marriage prospects. They remember all the bitterness from their parents' marriage. That could affect. So there are millions of children today who have lived through divorce and who carry that baggage into their future. It's a terrible thing. Those poor children. Pity them. And the children, when they see directly the hurt inflicted by one of the parents upon the other, can react in one of two ways. They'll either take sides and they get caught in the crossfire, or they'll keep their peace, but they have deep resentment towards the people, the parents, causing them such pain. So either they take sides and they get hurt, or they keep their peace and the hurt is inside. And it doesn't end with the children, it ends with the other partners to the relationships, the relatives, the in-laws and the outlaws we talked about last week. So what happens is, there's a divorce, a nasty divorce, the in-laws start getting involved. And this one, they don't start talking to each other, they start fighting as well. So that's a terrible thing. So the alternative is kindness, and that's the highest level. The person's going to try, even a divorce. Marriage didn't work out. Okay, it didn't work out. Let's part amicably, like grown-ups. Let's not be babyish and take vengeance on each other because there's no winners. So it's very important to know that there's a no-win situation. If a marriage goes through a bitter period and there's a break, make it a good clean break. It's like in hospitals when a person, orthopedic surgeon we just left. When a person breaks a limb, if it's a good clean break, that's the best way to break it, because that can be fixed very easily. But if there's cracks and there's 5 different breaks, that's very complicated. You need pins and this and that. So the marriage should be broken. If it has to be broken, it's got to be broken in a clean way. Something which you have to tell more people, because so much money is spent, wasted on fighting, and the kids are broken even more than they are already, and the only winners are the lawyers, and that's something which we have to talk about. The Talmud says there are 3 partners in the marriage. There's God, there's father and mother. And this partnership does not terminate with divorce. Father and mother still retain their responsibilities, however God has disappeared. The sanctity in the relationship has disappeared. What's left? Ish, fire. Ish and Isha, Yud and Hey. You take God's name out of the relationship, what's left? Ish, fire. They want to burn each other. There's no spiritual relationship. They're just feuding and fighting, and God is gone from the relationship. God does not like fighting. God disappears with fighting. And the other problem is, we're teaching children disrespect. The child has a mitzvah to honor their parents. Honor and respect their parents. But if the child sees parents don't honor themselves, they can't respect each other, the child says, why should I honor people who can't honor each other? So we're teaching children disrespect, and this is one of the problems with broken marriages or abusive relationships. The children themselves come out ruined. They're ruined morally, they're ruined ethically, they're ruined mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They can be ruined completely. And therefore, please have mercy on these kids. These kids must... Sometimes it's better to bear a marriage which is not thriving, but it's going, plugging along. It's better to live through a marriage like that and raise the children properly than divorce and ruin the children. Right? A person's got to think about, what are they doing it for? They're sacrificing. People today don't want to sacrifice. Sacrifice is a dirty word. So therefore, people don't want to sacrifice their good times. They think they're going to have good times. If only we knew, from the frying pan to the fire. Sometimes it's from the frying pan to the fire.
Sacrificing anyway.
Yeah, exactly. We don't realize it. People don't realize it. They think they're doing better. They think they're going to get better, we're going to start a new page. Sometimes it is a good new page. In a Jewish court, by the way, after the divorce, we say Mazel Tov. Why do we say Mazel Tov? Put the bad aside, behind you, close the chapter, move on with your life. Unfortunately, it's not so simple. People can't just move on. They carry the baggage with them. The fighting is still going on. So hopefully it'll be a clean divorce. And the person will then you can really say Mazel Tov. You tried, didn't work. Okay, try again. Try someone else.
Still be friends.
Maybe you can still be friends. Not friends, but at least like strangers. At least the minimum should be like strangers. You don't know each other, but you don't hate each other. You don't want to talk to each other, but don't hate each other. Don't have an acrimonious relationship, especially when they're children. When they're no children, just disappear, vanish, split the assets and vanish. But when there are kids, you can't vanish anymore. That's where the problems are. Okay, we'll stop here and continue the series. One more lecture next week.
Is
Yeah.
Judaism